Howdy, howdy, howdy. My name is Darby. I am in the presentation with Clarice and Ryan, and I'm gonna sort of follow up what Clarice said, and then maybe Ryan will add something after the fact. So let's get yammering. Okay, so one of the things that I am going to talk about real quick, first and foremost, is some definitions, just some like words. What are we talking about? So a satyr play was something that was named in the chapter. It's a short comedic play. It's performed it's performed after a trilogy of tragedies. It's like funny after tragedy. And then if you want to go to slide 7 on our Google Slides presentation, this is that. And then the theatron is the seating area where it's like where people sat, and the orchestra is where the chorus performed. It's still what we have for theaters today. The thymel is the altar, often used for religious sacrifices, like how Clarice said when it was about. It was a religious thing too, Dionysus. That was a really important part of the way that this was and the way that things were set up. So, and then the Acropolis is the part of the Greek city, and it's where people met, it's where people were. Skene is the backdrop building, and then just some other important terms to talk about to make sure that, we have everything, all bases covered. A choragus is a wealthy citizen who financed the production. So it'd essentially be like, in modern day, we have people like wealthy benefactors who fund theater and fund these kinds of things, which is cool. The parados is the entry for the chorus. If you want to go on to the next slide on the Google Slides presentation, there is a diagram of these kinds of things, which is helpful. The echolema, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's the wheeled platform that reveals scenes that occurred off stage. Um, so let's talk about other stuff. You can look at the definitions on there. The only other thing I'm going to talk about is agon is a debate over the merits of a happy idea. So it's essentially like, is this really a happy idea in this play? Is this really a good thing? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. And that's fine. Let's see. So one of the things is talking about changes or innovations in theater. Greek and Roman theater was very much religious in nature. Like, again, going off of what Clarice talked about a little bit, is when you talk about theater, especially during the period of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the purpose was to fulfill a religious obligation, often to the god Dionysus, right? It was this super duper important thing. It mattered a whole lot. And then obviously, like as we transitioned more into like a medieval type period, you had like the Wakefield cycle where it became much more Judeo-Christian in nature. Innovations in theater or things that changed. What are other innovations in theater? Things like the Eclema and Machina, Machine. I'm not sure how you say that, but like the Deus Ex Machina and the thing that's wheeled in to be the god of the machine, essentially for theater, which is super cool. Some influential people were Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. These are considered classic playwriters. Aeschylus wrote the Oresteia. Sophocles wrote Antigone. Antigone is the one where it's like, oh, my poor daughter, she dies. I have read that and it's kind of sad. Euripides wrote Oedipus Rex, and that's the main play that we're talking about today, is Oedipus Rex. Famous for, well, I mean, it's famous for a lot of reasons, right? You think Sigmund Freud, you think Oedipus complex, like when boys like their mothers. That's where this comes from, because Oedipus Rex really liked his mother, like, a lot. Cool. And that's fine. I mean, it's not fine. He gouges his eyes out because he's like, this is kind of bad because it is bad. Yeah, not great. Another important figure named in the chapter was Yasmin Reza, who is a playwright, and she wrote plays that went out of their way to explore intellectual concepts and to do more like fun concept art type stuff. She's named in the chapter specifically, which is cool. Let's see. Also, fun fact for ancient Greece stuff, they did not like women. Nope. They were not women fans at all. They were not big fans of women. Women were not their jam. Women weren't allowed to be a part of public life generally, and they super duper were not allowed to be involved in theater. So plays were written specifically for men, even like men would play the roles of women. Oftentimes in these plays, typically actors wore masks to signify what role they held in the play, which is super cool and interesting. Um, Yes. Let's see what else. Da-da-da-da-da-da. When you talk about like careers and stuff, so there's two primary careers that are discussed in the chapter, and it's a dramaturgy and a playwright. And Ryan should follow this up, but just in case, here's a little bit of a extra for you. So production dramaturgy is essentially like someone who works closely with the director. They're kind of like an advisor. They help the directors make creative decisions, make choices, etc., etc. They make about average for America in a year. I'm pretty sure the median average salary per person, if you take out the top like three wealthiest people in America, is like 45K a year. So it's like dramaturgies make about $54,000 a year. They serve like they're an advisor to the director, that sort of thing, which is cool. Um, yeah, and then playwrights. So what do playwrights do? So playwrights are they provide creative direction. They write the plays themselves. Oftentimes the plays have to be performed because like a line being written often doesn't have the same like weight or heft as something that like I don't know, something being physically spoken does. Those are very different things. The process varies person to person a lot. It typically is started with a concept and brainstorming phase that happens before the actual writing. Like you don't just sit down and write a whole play in one sitting. I mean, you can, but it's not typical. They make about $66,000 a year, so it's not terrible. Um, let's see. Let's see. So let's talk about the history of the time period for ancient Greece. What was it like? So one is their economy was dependent on slave labor, which is nice. It's not nice. That was sarcasm. Um, but the way that their society was set up, it was very much hierarchical in nature, right? They believed in the Greek pantheon and they believed in this like wide array of gods, and that kind of formed their like social hierarchy because even within the Greek pantheon, there is a pre-existing social hierarchy. Which is kind of not good, but it's myth, so it's not super relevant. But it does kind of inspire the way that they set up their society. And then even though it was a democratic system and Athens was considered a democratic system, the role of women was definitely diminished substantially. Um, Talking about Oedipus in particular, one of the things that makes it so much different as a play or makes it so much more relevant is the fact that like the ending of Oedipus and is so much more stretched out. The conclusion, the finale, the wrap up, that like third act, that section is so much more substance. There's so much more heft to that in general. And that like definitely packs a punch and a half. Which is meaningful, I think. Um, let's see. And then when you talk about, right, what are our plans for like how we would set this up? So first let's look at the play, right? What exactly is the play asking us to consider? What is the play asking us to do? So within the play you have your first setup where it's like he's born, right? They're living their best life, and then the oracle's like, yeah, whoops. And then, lives his life, and then he finds his dad at a crossroads. He's like, time for you to die. Not good, not good, not cool. So he kills his dad and marries his mother directly as the prophecy from the oracle had stated. Um, but it's this very, very dramatic story as we watch someone like try so hard to fight against this prophecy of this horrible thing of not only like committing patricide, but also becoming like romantically and sexually involved with one's own mother, which is kind of just a horrific concept on its own. Like the way that that stands is, definitely not positive, and it's definitely not something you super want to be involved in. And at this time period, theater and the way that physical theater was done differently, like talking about those definitions we talked about earlier, the physical structure for theaters changed so much during this time, especially with the like implementation of like the 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 machina and the eclima, those two things. They really changed the way like visually the theater was done, and then like seating wise it was done, and like it changes consistently throughout history, but the way that it was done, especially in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, is so notable and so interesting. And then when you talk about, let's see, then when you talk about things like, okay, so what would we do with Oedipus Rex? So one of the things that made this play interesting in particular is the fact that the end is so long and it's so much more dramatic, and you can really feel the like heft and the emotional weight as you're watching someone try to go against fate, as you're watching someone try to actively make a choice that would, hopefully propel them past this awful thing. Obviously, he's not successful, right? So the idea that me and Clarice had is, when we talked about it, we talked about essentially this idea of, okay, so what if we have sort of like these otherworldly creatures that are just watching it? So essentially, like, sort of like the chorus are like just nymphs or like otherworldly beings, and they're just kind of there. They're like, I mean, they're involved obviously as much as the chorus is, but it's like sort of like this presence that you can tell is there, and it's sort of almost like a stand-in for the audience. It almost functions it serves to have a similar function to be like, okay, this is me. I can put myself in the shoes of these characters. And I think that's what would make this so interesting. Definitely do it with very like ethereal, soft costuming. So, because it's such a tragic play, it kind of like, not that it's the same concept at all, but the ballet Giselle, where she like dies, it kind of reminds me of like, it's thematically kind of similar because the opposition of fate. And in Oedipus's own rejection of his fate and in his attempt to go against what he has been told, he like fulfills this, right? In his attempt to go against what the universe has said will happen to him, he runs face first right into it. It's kind of ridiculous. And I think it's really interesting. Like, continuously throughout the chapter, it talks about what made this so special and what made this so interesting. It's because as a play, right, it does have this much more drawn out ending. It's not, it's like not this first act, second act done over. It's like this really beautifully done tragic story that continues and continues and continues until you just kind of feel the pain and the discomfort along with Oedipus. And as theater changed, even though it was very much religious in nature, the aim of it was to be beautiful and was to convey some kind of message. And I think that's done incredibly well. And with theater, right, with Machina and with these sorts of things, it allowed theater to be more innovative. It allowed it to be more visually interesting, and it allowed innovations that still stand to this day. Looking at things like a playwright and looking at things like a dramaturgy, these are relevant to this play in particular, right? Like, if the playwright for Oedipus was Euripides, but and like he's the one who set the stage, had this like idea of, okay, this, I'm going to do this play about this guy who tries so hard to oppose fate, tries so hard to oppose the thing that he thinks is destined to happen to him, and in doing that is going to cause it, right? And there's so much effort, there's so much working to get to that point, and I think it's like a really interesting thing with playwrights. And then like with modern playwrights, you can look at like J.K. Rowling wrote a play, and then like who else wrote a play? Um, William Shakespeare was a playwright, right? They're the people who set the stage. They don't do the acting, but they set that up. The dramaturgy, like think with Oedipus, would be someone who would have like gone to Euripides and been like, "Hey, I think maybe you should have the mother's name be Jocasta or something like that," right? Like they provide insight. Oedipus is a play that still stands today as being considered a classic, as being considered something that was revolutionary for the genre, because even though tragedy had already existed, it did something different. It had this very resonant feeling with audiences, and it really makes you sit. The image at the end of this man with his eyes gouged out of his face as he just sits there and wallows in his suffering is such a powerful image to sit with, and I think that's part of the reason that Oedipus is such a powerful and important play, and I think it's something that's really, really like, I'm a fan. I think it's cool. Not the marriage mother stuff, but right? Looking at the way theater was done differently, looking at these sorts of things, I think it's cool. I think it's important. What, starting all the way from the prophecy that his parents received, and even in his parents' attempt to thwart fate, they are unsuccessful. This, in his parents' own attempt to thwart, in his parents attempted to thwart fate, and it's like this generational thing of trying to go against this. And like it talks about like, do we have agency? Do we have choices? And I think that's so interesting, and I think that's a thing that people grapple with all the time, and people grappled with in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, right? If I were Dionysus, I would think that this was pretty cool because it's like it's so powerful and it's so beautifully done. Yeah. So, and then if you want to just go through our slides, I have the slides that I talked about in particular were slides 7 through 11, where I talked about the important people, the time, etc., etc. And yeah, you can just click through those as you go, and it'll sort of just give you a visual for following along with this. So thank you so much for listening.